Welcome to Fearfully and Wonderfully Me, a podcast for women on leadership and life skills with Rhea Story.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's podcast episode on 3 critical questions for success. I've touched on this topic before in a podcast episode, but I wanted to come at it a little differently today and dig down a little differently. This topic is actually in one of the chapters of my book, The Ladder of Influence, 5 Steps for Climbing to the Next Level and Beyond. And I talk about these 3 key questions in the context of success because it's one of the things that we have to learn as we become more and more successful and effective in life. One of the things that we have to learn is when and how to say no to the things that are not our priorities. And that's hard to do sometimes. So I wanted to touch on this a little more in depth because Mac and I were speaking this week fairly locally. It's anything in the greater Atlanta area we kind of consider local. And even though with Atlanta traffic, it might take you 2 hours to get from Atlanta to Atlanta, but again, fairly local in terms of we, didn't have to drive all day to get there or get on a plane, and we were able to come home the same day. But one of the questions that someone in the audience asked us at the end is we were kind of wrapping up and just left a little space for questions. And one of the questions that someone asked was, how or when do you ever decide to say no in terms of speaking or working with a group and doing leadership training or development? And I let Mac answer first and give his perspective. And then I just added on to that, to his perspective of one of the things that I needed to realize is learning to say no it comes easier, I think, to some people than others. But learning to say no to the opportunities that come along that sound good, that may be good, but you're maybe not the best person for that, or the opportunity is just not in line with where you're going. And so I kind of wanted to explain that for her a little bit, but then that made me start thinking about that concept in terms of the return for us personally and professionally on the time and energy that we give to an opportunity. And I'd never really thought about that. And I wish I had thought about that in a little more detail as I was answering her question. But as I was thinking about that over the next day or so, I really thought about that from a different perspective that I didn't share in the book as I was writing the chapter in the book. So I want to share the 3 key questions and why they are so important to ask and answer for ourselves. So first and foremost, of course, we do have to learn when and how to say no, because we cannot do everything in life. And that's just, we all know of that. We all know that intuitively, logically, we can't do everything. But I hear so many people talk about, I'm too busy. I'm just too busy for this. I don't have time to exercise. I don't have time to spend with my family. And I forget who says it, but there was a great quote I shared not too long ago that says, if you don't have time for the important things in life, you should stop doing the unimportant things. But I hear so many people who are like, man, I just don't have time for this. I don't have time to this. We all have plenty of time. It's just that we are not always great at filtering out what we say yes to and what we say no to. John Maxwell says, what we say yes to shapes our life. And that's absolutely true. But what we say no to is what shapes our legacy, right? We have to learn to say no because we cannot do everything. We cannot excel at everything. And the more time and energy we give to the good things, the less time and energy we have for the great things. And we cannot reach our potential in life if we are not focusing on the great things as we define it, based on our values, our priorities, and where we're going. So 3 critical questions to ask and answer. Number 1, the principal question, what must I do? You have to look at the things that you have to get done. So for example, if you chose to have children a few years ago, you have to take care of those little people, right? That is something that on principle, you must do that because you have to honor that it's something that you have taken on as a responsibility, right? You can't simply get rid of your children or take them back to Walmart and ask for a refund. Or if you choose to work at a certain organization, then you have certain responsibilities. And if you want to keep your job, you have to do those responsibilities, right? That's part of your employment agreement. So you must do what you must do, but make sure you're very clear on what you must do. Most of the time, we say we have to do things, and we don't have to. We choose, or we are choosing to, but we don't really have to do that to honor responsibilities or something like that. So make sure that you're clear on, what do I have to do? Literally, what must I do to honor my previous commitments or my responsibilities? Number 2, the passion question. What do I love to do? What do you love doing so much that you would do it for free? And, what are the problems that you are put here to solve that you're passionate about? What are the things that you are excited to get up in the morning, right? It's so important to ask and answer that for yourself and be clear about that. Because if you're not excited and passionate about it and you're doing it anyway, that's a red flag or a signal that says, hey, you should look at some life changes so that you can spend more of your time and energy on things you are passionate about and excited about. Because if you're not passionate about it and you're not excited about it, you're never going to be better than average at doing it. And you cannot reach your potential if you're average at what you're doing, right? That's not you. It's obvious. It's a red flag that that's not your calling. Number 3, the purpose question. What should I do? And this is kind of where you start to dig into developing your competencies specifically related to your purpose, right? You're like, this is something I'm good at. This is something I'm passionate about doing. Now let me develop in the area so that I can be exceptional, so that I can contribute more in this space. And that's a little bit of a journey, right? Asking these questions is easy. Answering them takes a lot of thought and reflection, introspection, and that the answers may change over time. The answers may change over time. But once you've answered these questions, you've got a pretty clear idea of where what you're gifted at doing overlaps with where you're called and what you love to do. So it's important to do that. But here's why it's so important. There's an unequal relationship between inputs and outputs. And this is not a new concept. If you're familiar with the Pareto principle says that 80% of our results comes from 20% of our efforts. Well, that means that there is not an equal relationship to what we put in and what we get out, right? That's just the Pareto principle, is we get out most of our results from a smaller proportion or a smaller percentage of what we're putting in. So therefore, it's really, really important to know, what am I getting the most results from, and how can I spend more of my time on that and less of my time on the things that aren't bringing me results. And that's where we have to really get down to saying no to the things that are not taking us forward, right? Because the enemy of success is distraction. The enemy of focus is distraction, because your time is limited. Your energy is certainly limited. You only have a certain amount of time and energy and attention. And anytime those 3 things are drifting away or melting away or seeping away to something that is not taking you forward, then you need to be aware of that and you need to be intentional about it. And people who are not at that level of awareness with how important, how critical it is to be intentional with your time, energy, and attention may not understand why you do the things you do. I had someone recently, they were talking about that, or just pointing out or commenting that I don't come to a lot of just social events. Like I don't go to the monthly run club meeting, and I don't just go hang out with people just to be hanging out. I'm pretty intentional with my time. And I kind of explained, I said, well, I try to be very intentional with my time, and not that meeting monthly for a running club meeting is a bad thing, but it's just not how I want to spend my time and energy and attention, because it's not in line with the best use for my time and energy and attention relative to where I am and where I'm going and what I want to do. I could spend a couple hours every month attending that meeting, and it's a social outing, certainly. But if I've decided that, man, instead of doing that, I could spend those 2 hours a month doing a podcast or writing a blog, or maybe it's, instead of spending that time and energy in a social outing, maybe I want to invest just some time with enjoying the evening at home with Mac, right? And so there again, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm just saying we just have to be very intentional with where our time and energy is going, and is it going in the direction that we want it to? And if the answer is no, then we are the only ones who can make that change. But we have to be intentional about that. If we're not satisfied with where we are in life, and personally or professionally, then we need to think really hard about what 20% of our activities, time and energy, is bringing the greatest return, right? Because there's not an equal relationship to what we put in versus what we get out. And if we want to get out more, then we need to be thinking about what are we putting in and where should we be putting that instead. So for example, let's say I'm going to use running as an example, because I can relate to that, and I think most people can relate to that. If I want to run my next race faster, for example, so I have the next race that I've signed up for is not until December, and so I'll be entering like a training cycle about August, and getting ready to condition myself to run another 26-mile marathon. And if I want to set the goal of running this race faster than I ran the one last year, then I need to think about what are the things that give me the greatest return on my training. And I've done that, right? I've been intentional about that. And I realized that the things that give me the greatest return on my training are, number 1, nutrition, number 2, sleep, number 3, actual structured workouts that help me improve my condition and my fitness, right? So being intentional with those 3 key areas can help me improve. So the more I focus on those 3 things, and the less running time attention I'm giving to just running for the fun of it, or I don't feel like it today, or maybe I didn't get enough sleep, do I need to do this workout, right? So just being intentional with those inputs can bring me a greater return on my desired outcome. So another example of that would be, let's say how you spend your leisure time on a Saturday morning. If you have leisure time on a Saturday morning, depending on what your life looks like in the season you're in. But assuming that you have some discretionary leisure time on a Saturday when you're not working, and you're like, oh man, I really feel like I'm just going to relax and have some downtime and just enjoy the day. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But let's say that you only have 6 hours on a Saturday, and that is the majority of your discretionary time that you can spend any way you want it. You could look at that and say, well, I'm going to spend all 6 hours of that watching some movies, or watching a Netflix series, or just something to, chill out for the weekend. Or I could spend 20% of that time reading a personal growth book or a leadership book, or developing my communication skills. And that's going to bring me a much greater return of success in terms of increasing my influence at work, or helping me develop my leadership skills in leading my team, or increasing my influence with my children, right? And so then you realize that input is going to bring you a much greater output in terms of moving you forward toward your desired outcome. So again, just an encouragement to be intentional with what that looks like, and recognizing where your time and energy is going and redirecting it toward the things that move you forward in life. Until next time.